very famous protest that took place, Occupy Monroe Street? Remember that there were people walking around with placards saying, "Bring back Glass-Steagall, bring back Glass-Steagall." Remember that, Occupy Monroe Street? Why do we not remember Occupy Monroe Street? We don't remember it because it didn't happen. We don't remember it because the protests in Zuccotti Park were protesting on the wrong street. They were protesting in the wrong state. They were even protesting over 1,000 miles away from where $14 trillion of your money was stolen, while we were imploring the Federal Reserve to get more power by empowering a return to Glass-Steagall. I wonder if conspiracy theory is more theory or conspiracy. See, after the towers came down, we were told that the patriotic thing, if we're Americans, the patriotic thing to do is to go out and buy. Build the economy, consume. And so what we did was we instantaneously became more productive. All of our businesses were much more successful. Our salaries all went up. Oh, that didn't happen either. What we did was we went to our houses, which were the assets that we all seemed to think we owned, and we decided to turn our houses into ATMs, and we decided to take money out of our houses in the form of ATMs, and lo and behold, we turned our houses into ATMs, and what did we do? Buy. But what happened when we started buying, is that people started betting against humanity in the form of a little thing called a credit default swap. In the space of 5 years, we created more bets against humanity than the cumulative GDP of all of recorded human history in 5 years. 4 times the entire GDP of the United States we created in 5 years in the form of bets that you would default on your mortgage on the house that was actually your ATM, which was your patriotic response to buy, consume. And it turns out the bet was a good bet. You bought, you failed to pay your mortgage illusions, and 2008, the economy collapsed, and the perpetrators behind it were not on Wall Street. They were on Monroe Street in Chicago, trading the futures of their bets against humanity. That bet now is $70 trillion. $70 trillion. Why would somebody bet against humanity? Well, it's a safe bet. I hold in my hand a piece of pure gold. This is actually an 1880 $20 gold piece. Pure gold. It has a very interesting icon on the front of it. The face of liberty. I want to take you now on a journey into another place. Because I figure long about 4:45 in the afternoon, it's good for us to reflect, not on merely the celebration of humanity, but on the celebration of the resilience of humanity. I'm going to take you to Bougainville, Papua New Guinea, where in your name, for your 401k, and by the way, I'm speaking to 48% of the people in this room. You know who you are. 48% of the people in this room have a 401k. 48% of the people in this room have a 401k that benefited from the genocide of the erasure of 20,000 people in Bougainville in the course of 1 year. 20,000 people died for your retirement in 1 year, courtesy of a mining company that decided that their lives were less important than the enforcement of a consideration that was granted by the Australian government for assets of a copper mine and a gold mine in a place called Bougainville in the middle of the Coral Sea. And in the year of 1989, half of that island's population, 5 discrete language groups, cultures that had persisted in that place for 40,000 years were exterminated in 1 year. Half of the population of this island, all for this. All for this. All for your retirement accounts. And when confronted with that information at places like the New York Stock Exchange and the Australian Stock Exchange and the Toronto Stock Exchange, the response from the ethics oversight for the stock exchanges was, it's hard to police something so far away. Safe bet against humanity? I think so. But ladies and gentlemen, Archimedes taught us something a long time ago. Archimedes taught us that if you give me a lever, if you give me a place to stand, I can move the world. We've focused for the last 2,000 years on digital systems of levers, good and bad, good and evil, strong and weak, rich and poor. We've created our world into this delightful digital space where everything is so consolidated, everything is so compact, everything just makes sense because it's all simplified down to ones and zeros. That's why it's such a good bet to bet against humanity. Because it turns out that all we have is good and evil. All we have is black and white. All we have is right and wrong. We don't have the richness of the human experience. Because the richness of the human experience actually happens when you survey the systems and the momentums and the inertias in systems and realize that it's never been about the fulcrum, the lever. It's always been about the fulcrum. What does it mean to be a fulcrum ninja on Wall Street? Besides obviously looking like a ninja. Besides being able to make those wonderful kanji drawings in the air so that you can actually see I actually have the martial arts discipline of a ninja. Besides those things, what does it mean? Well, what it means is that now to solve those challenges that confront us, we need a new paradigm. You'll notice very carefully that I'm not talking about problems and solutions. Problems and solutions live in a digital world. The illusion is that if we're smart enough to discern a problem, somewhere out in the universe there must be a solution. But the problem with that myth, and the problem with that story, and the problem with the social systems that we build with those myths and those stories is we're missing the utility of the fulcrum. It turns out that without a fulcrum, Archimedes couldn't do a thing. And it turns out that if you study fulcrums in systems, you learn something very important. First of all, the bigger the obstacle, the bigger the challenge, the bigger that intractable impossible that we've heard so much about, the closer to that thing you need to get to effectuate the greatest change. Think about how a fulcrum works. If I move the fulcrum close to where I push all my pressure, and the object that I'm trying to move is way far away, I have to exert an enormous amount of pressure and I don't move the object. But if I can scooch that fulcrum over and get it right next to the object, and then I can go way, way back. At the end of my lever, I can push on the lever and the object tilts. Isn't it beautiful to realize that the way you solve the impossible, the intractable, the unassailable, the absolutely never can solve that problem is by embedding yourself as close to it as possible? Chris Uma is the head of the Mikamui Defense Force. The Mikamui Defense Force has continued conflict since 1989. And the United Nations, because the United Nations is a great lever organization, has decided to study how they solve the problem of conflict metals in Bougainville, because it's the most audacious challenge that the world can imagine, because no one can solve that problem. Well, it turns out the United Nations is precisely right. They cannot solve the problem. And they can't solve the problem because they're solving the problem. They actually think that the problem is we need to get Chris Ouma to put down his arms. So it was very interesting that I was invited to go to Bougainville, to a little place called Buka, travel up to the Panguna mine, the site of the genocide. I was advised about 30 minutes into the car ride that the last white person who had been anywhere near the Panguna mine had been hijacked, then kidnapped, and after 3 days, shot. I was told that about 30 minutes from the mine. I walked up to Chris Ouma, and I did something that no one in his entire clan of warriors had ever seen. I walked up to him, and I reached out my hand to shake his hand. He had never touched the hand of a white man before, ever. He had killed many, but he had never touched the hand of a white man before. And there's something very interesting about walking up to someone who allegedly had never touched the hand of a white man without killing them before, and actually reaching out your hand, because the person who had allegedly not ever touched that hand has a very interesting human response. He didn't go for his gun. He reached out his hand and shook my hand with an iron grip. And I said, Chris, that's the crappiest handshake I have had in my life. I said, if you were in the neighborhoods I grew up in, you wouldn't do that. And I grabbed his hand, high-fived him, and shoulder bumped him. And I said, that's how you say hello. Guys with machine guns pointed straight at my abdomen did not exactly know what to do in that precise moment. It's funny how machine guns lose to humanity if humanity actually shows up. It's amazing how many times the reason why you can't solve a problem is because nobody's actually going to where the problem actually happened. Because if you actually go there, you find that there was no problem. Because after 45 minutes with Chris Ouma and his warriors, he agreed to put down arms. Because for the first time, someone had honored him with information from afar. For the first time, he understood why the injustice that they had felt for so many years actually was real injustice. And he wasn't wrong in his feeling, he just didn't have the information. And by creating a lever long enough with information, we move the world. Archimedes had it wrong. He asked for him to get a lever, for him to have a place to stand, for him to move the world. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the era of leverage is over. The epoch of fulcrumage has begun. Fulcrumage is when you choose to place yourself not at a distance to critique, not remote enough to be safe. No, ladies and gentlemen, the best of all fulcrums is when you actually get rid of the lever altogether and embed yourself in the thing that you think is impossible and intractable, just a little off axis. Because then the spinning wheel, the inertia, the momentum doesn't have you occupying, doesn't have you protesting, doesn't having you respond every time someone says jump. No, at that moment, the inertial mass of the thing you said could never change changes because you put yourself right off center. And it does all the work. There are no challenges, there are no problems, there are no solutions. There are fulcrums waiting to be moved, to tip, to actually move the world. Thank you very much.